The man behind the mask has left evidence everywhere. DNA in a black glove found near Nancy Guthrie's home. Digital searches for her address spanning 8 months before she disappeared. A vehicle captured on camera 8 minutes after her pacemaker stopped transmitting. Purchases of equipment used in the crime tracked through retail transaction records. Cell phone data potentially placing someone near her property at critical times. Each piece of evidence exists independently. Each came from a different investigative method. Each was discovered through separate processes by different teams using different technologies. And when multiple independent lines of evidence all point to the same person, when DNA and digital trails and camera captures and financial transactions converge on a single individual, that is when identification happens. That is when cases break. That is when the anonymous masked figure in doorbell camera footage becomes a name, an address, a person with a history and connections who can be arrested and charged and prosecuted. This is how modern investigations work in the 21st century. Not through single pieces of evidence that solve cases alone, like in television dramas where one fingerprint or one witness identifies a perpetrator immediately, but through convergence, through the patient, systematic combination of forensic science, digital forensics, surveillance technology, witness testimony, financial tracking, and traditional detective work, until enough threads come together that they weave a net from which no suspect can escape regardless of how careful they think they have been. The man who took Nancy Guthrie on February 1, 2026, believed he could avoid identification by wearing a mask and gloves. He understood some aspects of evidence and surveillance. He knew that faces can be recognized and that fingerprints can identify, but he did not understand convergence. He did not understand that every action creates not just one form of evidence, but multiple forms, and that investigators working systematically across different disciplines and different technologies can combine those forms until the pattern becomes clear and undeniable and strong enough to support arrest and prosecution. If you want to understand how convergence actually works in major criminal investigations, how DNA evidence combines with digital forensics and camera surveillance and retail tracking, and cell tower data to identify suspects even when they try to hide their identity through masks and gloves and careful planning, how cases like the Golden State Killer were solved through exactly this methodology of combining evidence from completely independent sources until one name emerged from multiple databases, and how Nancy Guthrie's case is following the same investigative path with the same techniques being applied by the same kinds of specialists who solved those previous cases, and why the man behind the mask has already created enough evidence across enough different systems that identification is likely just a matter of time and systematic work, rather than a question of whether it will happen at all. Then subscribe to True Crime Vault right now. This channel explains real investigative techniques without speculation or sensationalism or making accusations against innocent people. We break down how evidence actually works in the real world, how investigators actually solve cases using science and technology and methodical processes, and how justice gets achieved in complex cases through the combination of multiple disciplines working together toward a common goal. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, because when this case breaks, when convergence leads to identification of the person responsible for Nancy's disappearance, you want to understand exactly how it happened and what evidence made it possible and what investigative techniques proved decisive. Hit the like button as well, because comprehensive analysis of investigative methodology deserves to reach everyone interested in understanding how justice is achieved in complex cases and how modern forensic science works. And comment below telling us which form of evidence you think will be most important in identifying the man behind the mask. Will it be DNA, digital trails, camera footage, retail records, cell tower data, or the combination of all of them? Now let us examine in detail how convergence works as an investigative principle, what evidence exists in Nancy's case that creates the foundation for convergence, and why multiple independent threads all pointing toward the same person creates certainty that no single piece of evidence can provide alone. Convergence in criminal investigation means that multiple independent lines of evidence all lead to the same conclusion or all point to the same individual. It is the investigative equivalent of triangulation in navigation or surveying. If you want to determine the precise location of something, one measurement from one position gives you a direction but not a precise position. You know the object is somewhere along that line of sight, but you do not know how far. Two measurements from two different positions with different angles give you much better precision because the two lines intersect at one point. Three or more measurements from three or more different positions allow you to pinpoint location with very high confidence because all the lines should intersect at the same point. And if they do not, one of your measurements is wrong. The same principle applies to identifying suspects in criminal cases. One piece of evidence creates a possibility or a direction of investigation. Multiple pieces of evidence from completely independent sources create certainty because the probability that they all coincidentally point to the same innocent person becomes vanishingly small. Let me explain in more depth why independence matters so profoundly in convergence analysis. If you have 5 pieces of evidence but they all came from the same source or were derived using the same method, they might all be wrong in the same way or influenced by the same error or bias. If you are relying entirely on witness testimony and you have 5 witnesses who all saw the same event, their accounts might all be influenced by the same misperception caused by poor lighting, or the same distance from the event that made details unclear, or the same preconceptions about what they expected to see. One witness making a mistake in identification is concerning. 5 witnesses all making the same mistake because they all had the same limitations is a systematic problem. But if you have 5 pieces of evidence from 5 completely different methods using completely different technologies and completely different sources, the probability that all 5 are wrong in a way that coincidentally points to the same innocent person is mathematically tiny. DNA analysis uses molecular biology and genetic markers. Digital forensics uses computer science and network analysis. Camera surveillance uses optical technology and image analysis. Financial tracking uses transaction databases and business records. Cell tower analysis uses telecommunications data and geographic positioning. These are totally different fields using totally different methodologies, examining totally different types of data. For all 5 to independently point to the same person and for that person to be innocent would require an extraordinary coincidence. This is why convergence creates the kind of certainty that can support arrest and prosecution, and that can convince juries to convict beyond reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys are very skilled at challenging individual pieces of evidence. They can bring in expert witnesses to argue that DNA might be contaminated or degraded or misinterpreted. They can argue that digital searches might represent innocent research or curiosity rather than criminal planning. They can argue that camera captures might show someone in the area for completely unrelated legitimate reasons. They can argue that financial records show purchases that could have innocent purposes. They can argue that cell phone data showing someone near a location does not prove they were at that exact location or that they had criminal intent. But when DNA and digital searches and camera captures and financial records and cell data all point to the same person, when 5 or 6 or 7 completely independent lines of investigation all arrive at the same name through completely different paths, the defense has to argue that all of those independent lines of evidence are simultaneously wrong or misleading or coincidental in ways that happen to converge on their client who is actually innocent. And that argument becomes effectively impossible to sustain in front of a jury because it requires asking the jury to believe in a level of coincidence that defies probability and common sense. Now let us walk through systematically and in detail the evidence that exists in Nancy Guthrie's case and understand how it creates the foundation for convergence that will likely lead to identification of the person responsible, even though no suspect has been publicly named yet, as of the most recent reporting 26 days after she disappeared. I will go through each category of evidence, explain how it works investigatively, describe what is known about that evidence in Nancy's case, and show how it contributes to the potential for convergence. First, DNA evidence, which is often the gold standard in forensic science for linking specific individuals to specific locations or objects. A black glove was found near Nancy's home during searches of the area conducted in the days after her disappearance. That glove was collected by investigators as potential evidence. The glove was examined and DNA was extracted from it. DNA can come from multiple sources on clothing items like gloves, skin cells shed from hands that wore the glove, sweat that soaked into the fabric, hair that might have been caught in the glove material, blood if the person had any cuts or wounds on their hands, saliva if the person touched the glove to their mouth for any reason. The DNA extraction process uses chemical methods to isolate genetic material from the biological material present on the evidence. That genetic material gets analyzed to create a DNA profile, which is essentially a genetic fingerprint showing the specific markers at multiple locations in the genome that are highly variable between individuals. That profile gets entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which is a national database maintained by the FBI that contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders in all 50 states, from arrestees in states that collect DNA at arrest rather than waiting for conviction, and from evidence collected at crime scenes in unsolved cases. The CODIS search compares the DNA profile from the glove against all the profiles in the database looking for matches. A match would mean someone whose DNA is already in CODIS for a previous crime or arrest left DNA in that glove. According to reporting about Nancy's case, the CODIS search did not produce a match. That means the person whose DNA is in the glove has never been convicted of a felony in a state that requires DNA collection from felons, has never been arrested in a jurisdiction that takes DNA from arrestees, and is not connected to other unsolved crimes that have DNA evidence in the database. But the absence of a CODIS match absolutely does not mean the DNA is useless or that this line of investigation is dead. It simply means investigators move to the next level of DNA analysis, which is forensic genealogy, a technique that has revolutionized cold case investigation in the past several years and that has solved dozens of cases that were unsolvable through traditional DNA database searching. The DNA profile from the glove, which contains genetic information about the person who wore it, can be uploaded to public genealogy databases like GDmatch or Family Tree DNA, where millions of people have voluntarily submitted their own DNA to find relatives and build family trees and explore their ancestry. When an investigative DNA profile gets uploaded to these genealogy databases, the system searches for genetic matches among all the profiles that users have made publicly searchable. Those matches are typically not the suspect himself unless the suspect happened to have submitted his own DNA to a genealogy service for personal reasons. Instead, the matches are distant relatives, third cousins who share great-great-grandparents with the suspect, fourth cousins who share great-great-great-grandparents, fifth cousins who share ancestry going back 5 or 6 generations. These genetic relationships show up as shared segments of DNA that were inherited from common ancestors generations ago. Forensic genealogists, who are specialists in combining genetics with traditional genealogical research, then use those distant cousin matches to build family trees. They start with the matched profiles and work backward through genealogical records, birth certificates, marriage records, census data, obituaries, newspaper archives, to identify who those people are and who their ancestors were. They build trees going back generation by generation until they find common ancestors shared by multiple matches. Those common ancestors, who might have lived in the 1800s or early 1900s, are the point where the suspect's family line and the match's family line diverge. Then the genealogists work forward from those common ancestors through all of their descendants. They trace every child and grandchild and great-grandchild down through the generations to the present day, identifying everyone alive today who could potentially be the source of the crime scene DNA based on being descended from those common ancestors. That initial list of potential candidates might include hundreds of people spread across the country descended from one set of ancestors who lived 6 generations ago. But that list gets filtered systematically using known characteristics of the suspect. Age can be estimated from the doorbell camera footage showing physical build and movement patterns. A person in their 20s moves differently than someone in their 60s. Sex is known from the FBI description of the suspect as appearing male. Geographic location is known or can be reasonably inferred because the person had to be in Tucson on February 1st and likely lives in or near Arizona or has strong connections to the area. Any other physical characteristics visible in footage like height or build help narrow further. The genealogists apply all those filters to the descendant list. They eliminate everyone who is the wrong age to match the suspect. They eliminate everyone who lives on the opposite side of the country with no Arizona connections. They eliminate women if the suspect is clearly male. They eliminate people who do not fit the physical description. The list narrows from hundreds to dozens to ultimately a handful of viable candidates who match the age, sex, location, and physical characteristics, and who are genetically positioned in the family tree to be the source of the DNA. Investigators then obtain DNA samples from those remaining candidates. If the candidate is cooperative Investigators can request a voluntary DNA sample through direct contact. If the candidate is uncooperative or if investigators want to avoid alerting them, surveillance teams can collect discarded items. A coffee cup thrown in a public trash can, a cigarette butt discarded on a sidewalk, a water bottle left at a table. Any item that contains biological material can be collected legally if it was abandoned in a public space. If probable cause has been established through other evidence, investigators can seek court orders compelling DNA samples. Those collected samples get analyzed and compared to the crime scene DNA from the glove. When a match is found, when the genetic profile from the candidate's sample matches the profile from the glove at all the tested markers, identification is complete with extraordinarily high certainty. The probability of two unrelated people having identical DNA profiles at the number of markers typically tested is less than 1 in a trillion. That level of certainty exceeds any reasonable doubt standard. This forensic genealogy process takes time and specialized expertise. The Golden State Killer case, which pioneered this technique in a high-profile way in 2018, required months of genealogy work after the DNA was uploaded to GED Match before investigators identified Joseph DeAngelo as the suspect. The genealogists had to build extensive family trees, track down descendants across multiple states, verify relationships through records, and systematically eliminate candidates. But the process worked. It led to identification of a serial killer and rapist who had evaded capture for 40 years. Nancy's case is almost certainly following this same path right now. The DNA from the glove has either already been uploaded to genealogy databases or is in the process of being prepared for upload if initial CODIS searches and other database checks have been exhausted. Forensic genealogists are either already working on building trees and identifying candidates, or will begin that work soon if they have not started yet. This work is happening in parallel with all the other investigative threads. It is not dependent on other evidence. It proceeds on its own timeline driven by the complexity of the genetic matches and the availability of genealogical records. And at some point, that work will produce a name or a small number of names that represent the most viable candidates based on genetic relationship to the crime scene DNA, combined with age, location, and physical characteristics. Those names then get investigated through every other available means: background checks, criminal history, employment records, known associates, property ownership, vehicle registrations, everything that can be learned about those individuals from public and law enforcement databases. And critically, those names get compared against findings from all the other lines of investigation. Which brings us to the second major category of evidence: digital trails. Fox News reported on February 18th that Google Trends data showed searches for Nancy's home address going back 8 months before she disappeared. A search for her address between June 21st and June 28th, 2025, 7 to 8 months before she vanished. Image searches for her property between March 1st and March 8th, 2025. Another image search between November 30th and December 1st, 2025. A search for Savannah Guthrie's salary between December 13th and December 20th, 2025. And a search for Nancy's address on January 11th, 2026, exactly 3 weeks before she was taken. But as I have explained in previous coverage, and as Google itself warned Fox News, Google Trends is not the same as investigative-grade evidence. Trends is a public marketing tool designed to show aggregate search patterns across populations. For topics with low search volume like a specific residential address, Trends injects random noise to protect user privacy. That means spikes visible in Trends for uncommon searches might not represent real searches at all, but might be fabricated data points the system inserted to prevent identification of individual users. What investigators use for actual evidence is not Google Trends, but actual search logs obtained through legal subpoenas served on Google's legal department, compelling the company to produce records from internal databases. When prosecutors working with investigators prepare a subpoena requesting search records for Nancy's specific address, that subpoena goes through court approval and then gets served on Google. Google is legally required to comply by searching their systems for all searches matching the criteria and producing the results with all associated metadata. Those subpoenaed search logs contain information that Trends never shows, and that is crucial for identification. First, IP addresses. Every search comes from a device connected to the internet through an IP address assigned by an internet service provider. If a search originated from a home computer connected to residential broadband, the IP address traces to that broadband account. If a search came from a smartphone using cellular data, the IP address traces to the cellular carrier and the phone number. Investigators can take those IP addresses and subpoena the service providers who own those address blocks. The providers respond with subscriber information showing who owned the account associated with that IP address at the time of the search. Name, billing address, account activation date, all the details that turn an anonymous number into an identified person. Second, device identifiers. If searches came from smartphones or tablets, the logs contain unique device identifiers that are like fingerprints for that specific phone or tablet. Those identifiers can be correlated with other data to determine who owns that device. Third, Google account information. If someone was logged into their Google account when they searched, the logs include all the information associated with that account. Email address used to create the account. Recovery phone number and alternate email for password resets. Payment information if any Google services have been purchased. Complete search history, showing every search that account has ever made while logged in. YouTube viewing history. Location history, if location services were enabled. The account creates a comprehensive profile of the person's online activity. Fourth, precise timestamps. Not weekly windows like Trends shows, but exact times down to the second. 2:37:42 p.m. on January 11th, 2026, for example. That precision allows correlation with other evidence. If cell tower data shows someone's phone near Nancy's property at 9:15 p.m. on January 11th, and Google search logs show a search for her address from that same phone at 7:30 p.m. the same day, the timing connects. Fifth, geographic location data. Depending on the device and settings, searches might include GPS coordinates showing where the device was physically located when the search occurred. Latitude and longitude precise to within meters. That can place someone not just generally in Tucson, but specifically in a neighborhood or at a specific address at the moment they searched. All of this metadata exists in Google's systems for operational, technical, and legal reasons. It gets logged automatically. And when investigators serve proper legal subpoenas, Google produces it for the specific searches requested. If the searches visible in Trends data for Nancy's address are real searches that actually occurred from actual devices, then subpoenaed logs will contain all this metadata pointing to whoever made those searches. Once investigators have IP addresses or Google accounts from search logs, they can identify the individuals responsible. They can subpoena internet service providers or cellular carriers to get subscriber names. They can analyze Google account profiles to determine identity. And once they have names, they compare those names against all other evidence. Is the person who searched for Nancy's address in June also on the candidate list from DNA genealogy? Does that person own a Kia Soul matching the vehicle seen on camera at 2:36 a.m.? Did that person purchase an Ozark Trail backpack from Walmart? That is convergence beginning to happen. The digital forensics work also extends beyond just Google searches. Investigators can potentially access other online activity depending on what legal authority they can establish. Social media posts or messages, if probable cause exists, and platforms comply with subpoenas. Email content if warranted, and if email providers can be compelled to produce it under applicable law. Internet browsing history from service providers if such records exist and are accessible. The digital footprint of anyone in the modern world is extensive, and investigators with proper legal process can access significant portions of it. Third major category of evidence is camera surveillance, which creates visual records of people and vehicles in specific places at specific times. The FBI released doorbell camera footage from Nancy's home, showing the masked suspect at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. That 44 seconds of recovered footage, despite Nancy not having a cloud storage subscription, shows the suspect attempting to knock down the camera and then covering it with plant foliage. The footage was enhanced and analyzed by FBI video specialists, and the analysis produced specific identifying characteristics despite the mask and gloves. Height estimated at 5'9" to 5'10", based on comparison with known dimensions of the door frame and other fixed objects visible in the frame. Medium build, not obviously overweight or unusually thin. Black mustache visible despite the mask according to details released by FBI on February 12th, suggesting the mask did not cover the entire face or that facial hair was visible around the edges. Behavioral patterns including the specific method of attempting to disable the camera first by tapping it gently and then covering it with foliage rather than breaking it or spraying it. Equipment including the distinctive Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, with its recognizable design and the holstered handgun positioned awkwardly over the groin area, as FBI Director Kash Patel described it. All of those details create a profile of the suspect that can be compared against identified individuals. If DNA genealogy produces a candidate who is 6'4", that candidate does not match the height estimate from footage. If digital forensics identifies someone who searched for Nancy's address and that person is 5'9" with a black mustache, that match strengthens the connection. Physical characteristics become another filter, another data point in the convergence. Additionally, camera evidence extends far beyond just Nancy's doorbell. The neighbor's Ring camera on Camino Real, 2.5 miles away, captured 12 vehicles between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st during the 6-hour window when Nancy was taken. One of those vehicles, passing at 2:36 a.m. 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker disconnected, was analyzed by retired NYPD detective Pat Brosnan, who identified it as appearing to be a Kia Soul based on distinctive features, including the sloped roofline, window design, side rear glass, and vertical brake lights. If that vehicle identification is accurate, and if that vehicle is connected to the crime rather than coincidentally passing, then identifying the driver becomes another thread. License plate enhancement from the Ring footage might make the plate readable. Correlation with other camera footage from other neighbors might show the same vehicle at different times or locations, creating a route map. Automated license plate reader databases, if any exist in the area, might have captured that vehicle entering or leaving the Catalina foothills. Each method of identifying the vehicle is independent, but they can work together. Once a vehicle is identified through any method, DMV registration records show the owner. If the Kia Soul owner also appears on the DNA candidate list, convergence is happening. If the owner also made Google searches for Nancy's address, convergence strengthens. If the owner purchased a matching backpack, the net tightens. Beyond the specific vehicles visible in known footage, investigators have requested camera footage from potentially hundreds of homes in the Catalina foothills area. Each camera that captured vehicles or people during relevant time frames provides more data points. Those can be cross-referenced, creating networks of vehicle movements through the neighborhood. If the same vehicle appears on 10 different cameras at times that trace a route from Nancy's street to Camino Real and beyond, that route becomes evidence. Fourth category of evidence is retail transaction tracking, which connects purchases of specific items to specific individuals. The Ozark Trail hiker pack visible in the doorbell footage is sold exclusively at Walmart. That exclusivity is investigatively valuable because it limits where purchases could have occurred. Every single person who owns that backpack acquired it either by purchasing it at Walmart, or by receiving it from someone who purchased it at Walmart, or by stealing it from Walmart, or from someone who owned one. Investigators can request from Walmart all transaction records for that specific backpack model, identified by SKU number or product code, from all Tucson area Walmart stores during a relevant time frame, perhaps 6 months before Nancy disappeared, to capture anyone who might have purchased the backpack well in advance of the crime as part of long-term planning. Walmart's transaction systems log every sale. If someone paid with credit card or debit card, the transaction record contains their name directly from the payment information. The card company processes the transaction, and Walmart's systems record the name associated with the card. That provides immediate identification of the purchaser. If someone paid cash, the transaction still occurred at a specific register at a specific timestamp. Walmart security cameras cover all checkout areas from multiple angles, with timestamps synchronized to transaction systems. Investigators can request security footage from those stores for those specific transaction times. The footage shows who was at that register making that purchase at that timestamp. That person can potentially be identified from the footage through facial recognition if image quality supports it, through correlation with parking lot cameras that captured the vehicle they arrived in and the license plate of that vehicle, or through other means. Walmart parking lot cameras, as I have explained in previous coverage, are extensive and capture vehicles entering and leaving the property. Even cash purchases that avoid creating financial records with names still create visual records. The person who bought the backpack with cash drove to Walmart, or was driven there, or walked there. If they drove, their vehicle and license plate were likely captured. If they were driven, the driver's vehicle was captured. Those license plates traced to registered owners through DMV databases. Once purchasers of the backpack are identified through any of these methods, credit card records or cash purchase camera tracking, investigators check whether any of them connect to other evidence. Does anyone who bought the backpack match DNA candidates? Did anyone who bought the backpack also search for Nancy's address on Google? Does anyone match the physical description from doorbell footage? Does anyone own a vehicle matching those seen on area cameras? Each connection is another thread in convergence. Additionally, retail tracking can extend to other items if investigators can identify them as relevant. If the suspect purchased gloves somewhere and those can be traced, that is additional evidence. If the weapon visible in the footage can be connected to a purchase, that is evidence. If any other equipment or clothing can be identified and sourced, each creates another potential connection point. Fifth major category is cell tower data, which tracks the location of mobile phones through their constant communication with cellular network infrastructure. Cell phones, even when not actively being used for calls or data, constantly communicate with nearby towers to maintain connectivity. When a phone moves, it hands off from tower to tower as signal strength changes. All of these communications create logs in cellular carrier systems, showing which phone connected to which tower at which time. Those logs do not provide GPS-level precision of location. Cell towers cover areas, not points. A tower might cover several square miles depending on terrain and tower density, but the logs show that a phone was within range of a specific tower at a specific time. If investigators have identified a suspect or person of interest through other means, they can subpoena cell tower records for that person's phone number. The records show whether that phone was near Nancy's home on dates of interest. If the phone connected to towers that cover Nancy's neighborhood on January 11th, when Google Trends showed an address search, and when neighbors reported seeing a suspicious man, and when doorbell footage may have captured a prior reconnaissance visit, that places the phone in the area at that time. If the phone was near Nancy's home again on February 1st during the time frame of her disappearance, that is another data point. If the phone traveled a route after 2:28 a.m. that is consistent with the path from Nancy Street to Camino Real where the Kia Soul was seen, that supports connection. Cell data alone does not prove guilt. People are allowed to drive through neighborhoods. Phones being near locations is not evidence of crimes, but cell data combined with other evidence creates compelling patterns. If someone's phone was near Nancy's home on multiple dates, including the night she disappeared, and if that same person also searched for her address on Google, and if that person bought the backpack, and if that person's DNA matches or relates to the glove, the convergence of phone location data with all those other independent pieces makes the pattern undeniable. Cell data can also potentially be used to identify unknown suspects if investigators can determine which phones were in certain areas at certain times. If investigators request from cellular carriers all phones that connected to specific towers covering Nancy's neighborhood during specific time frames, they receive lists of phone numbers. Those can be cross-referenced against resident databases to eliminate locals who would have innocent reasons for being in the area. Any phones that appear in the area repeatedly but do not belong to residents become interesting. Any phone that was there on both January 11th and February 1st especially merits investigation. Now let me explain how all of these independent categories of evidence come together through the process of convergence to identify suspects. Imagine that DNA genealogy work produces a candidate list of 12 people who are the right age, sex, location, and build to potentially be the source of the DNA in the glove and who are descended from the common ancestors identified through genetic matches in databases. Those 12 names go into a spreadsheet or database. Simultaneously, Google search log subpoenas, if they have been executed, return IP addresses or account information for whoever searched for Nancy's address in June, March, November, December, and January. Those IP addresses get traced through internet service providers to subscriber names. Perhaps that produces 5 names of people whose internet connections or Google accounts were used for searches related to Nancy. Those 5 names go into the same database. Camera analysis work identifies purchasers of Ozark Trail backpacks through Walmart transaction and security footage review. Perhaps that produces 8 names of people who bought that specific backpack in Tucson area stores in the 6 months before Nancy disappeared. Those 8 names go into the database. Cell tower data, if obtained for phones identified through other means or through broad requests to carriers, might identify 15 phones that were near Nancy's home on both January 11th and February 1st. Those phone numbers trace to subscriber names. Those 15 names go into the database. Vehicle identification work from multiple cameras might identify owners of several vehicles of interest seen in the area during relevant times. Perhaps that produces 6 names of vehicle owners whose cars appear in footage. Those go into the database. Now investigators look for names that appear in multiple independent columns of that database. One name appears in the DNA candidate list and also in the Google search list. That is convergence starting. That one person has genetic relationship to the crime scene DNA and also searched for the victim's address. That merits deeper investigation. Further checking shows that same name purchased a backpack at Walmart. That is 3 independent threads converging. Further checking shows that person's phone was near the location on key dates. 4 threads. That person owns a vehicle matching one seen on cameras. 5 threads. That person matches the physical description from doorbell footage. 6 threads. At some point the convergence becomes overwhelming. 6 or 7 or 8 completely independent lines of evidence all pointing to the same individual cannot be coincidence. The probability is too low. That person becomes the primary suspect. That person gets investigated intensively. Interviews with associates, employment verification, alibi checking, financial records, social media history, everything that can be learned. And if nothing in that intensive investigation contradicts the convergence, if the person has no alibi that eliminates them, if their associates do not provide exculpatory information, if their background is consistent with being capable of this crime, then that convergence supports arrest. Search warrants get executed. The person gets taken into custody. Formal DNA samples get collected for definitive comparison. Interrogation occurs, and if the evidence holds up, charges get filed. This methodology has been proven effective in countless cases. The Golden State Killer case is the most famous example because of the profile of the crimes and the length of time the perpetrator evaded capture. But it is far from the only case solved through convergence. Dozens of cold cases have been solved since 2018 using forensic genealogy combined with other evidence. Investigators have learned that combining independent evidence sources creates certainty that single sources cannot provide. Subscribe to True Crime Vault if you have not already. Turn on all notifications. Like this video. Visit our channel for all our previous coverage of the Nancy Guthrie case. And comment with your analysis of which evidence category you think will be most decisive. Now, let me address why no suspect has been publicly identified yet despite all this evidence and ongoing work. There are several possible explanations, and we cannot determine from outside which is accurate. First possibility is that convergence has not yet occurred. DNA genealogy work is still in progress building family trees and has not yet produced a finalized candidate list. Digital forensics either has not yet obtained Google search records through subpoenas, or has obtained them, but they have not led to identifiable individuals. Camera work has not yet produced vehicle identifications. Retail tracking has not yet connected backpack purchasers to other evidence. Cell data has not yet been obtained or analyzed. All the threads exist, but they have not come together yet. This is plausible given that only 26 days have passed since Nancy disappeared. Complex forensic work takes time. Second possibility is that partial convergence has occurred identifying several potential suspects, but not narrowing to one definitive person yet. Perhaps 3 or 4 individuals each connect to some evidence but not all evidence. One person matches DNA and digital searches but not the vehicle. Another person matches the vehicle and the backpack purchase but not DNA. Investigators are still working to determine which, if any, of these partial matches is actually responsible, or whether the true perpetrator has not yet been identified at all. Third possibility is that full convergence has occurred and investigators have identified a primary suspect, but do not yet have sufficient evidence to support arrest. They know or strongly believe they know who did it based on multiple lines of evidence pointing to one person, but they need additional corroboration before filing charges. Perhaps they are waiting for final DNA confirmation through direct sample comparison. Perhaps they are conducting surveillance to gather more behavioral evidence. Perhaps they are interviewing associates to build a stronger case. Perhaps they are waiting for additional forensic results. They are building the case carefully to ensure the strongest possible prosecution when charges are filed. Fourth possibility is that convergence has occurred. A suspect has been identified and even arrested, but public announcement has not yet been made. Arrests do not always get publicized immediately. especially in cases involving federal agencies like the FBI, where coordination and strategic considerations about publicity and evidence protection play significant roles in deciding when and how to announce developments. We cannot know from outside the investigation which scenario is accurate. Investigators do not share their internal processes or findings with the public until they are ready, but we can assess based on what has been reported publicly that the evidence exists for convergence to potentially occur. DNA is in databases or genealogy systems being analyzed. Digital trails exist if the searches were real and if proper legal process has obtained the underlying logs. Camera footage exists from Nancy's doorbell and from neighbors' cameras throughout the area. Retail records exist and can be accessed through cooperation with Walmart. Cell data exists for any phones that investigators have identified as relevant through other means. The pieces are there. Whether they have come together yet is the question that will be answered when investigators are ready to share results or when arrests get made and court documents become public. But the methodology is sound. The techniques work, and the same processes that solved the Golden State Killer case 40 years after the crimes are being applied to Nancy's case just weeks after she disappeared. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 26 days as of the most recent reporting. Every day that passes is another day of laboratory work on DNA, another day of genealogy research building family trees and identifying candidates, another day of digital forensics analyzing records and tracing IP addresses, another day of camera footage enhancement and vehicle identification, another day of retail transaction tracking, another day of cell data analysis, another day of traditional detective work interviewing witnesses and following leads. All of those parallel processes are ongoing. All are producing results. And at some point, those results converge. True Crime Vault will continue following this case, providing comprehensive analysis until Nancy is found and those responsible are identified and brought to justice. Subscribe to this channel for ongoing coverage. Turn on all notifications so you are alerted immediately when we post updates. Like this video to help the algorithm show it to more people interested in understanding how real investigations work. Visit our channel to see all our previous videos analyzing the doorbell footage, the Google search data, the Kia Soul identification, the backroad camera evidence, and every other aspect of this case. And comment below with your thoughts on convergence and which evidence you think will prove most important. The man behind the mask believed he could hide his identity. He wore a mask to prevent facial recognition. He wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. He tried to disable cameras. He understood some aspects of evidence and surveillance, but he did not understand convergence. He did not understand that modern investigations do not rely on any single piece of evidence. He did not understand that every action creates multiple forms of evidence across multiple systems, and that investigators working methodically can gather evidence from all those systems and combine it until patterns emerge. Wearing gloves protects from fingerprints, but gloves themselves can contain DNA from skin cells that shed from hands, from sweat that penetrates fabric, from hair that gets caught in the material. The gloves protect one form of evidence while creating another. Covering your face with a mask protects from facial recognition but does not hide height or build or gait or body language or behavioral patterns that can all be analyzed from footage. Physical characteristics remain visible even when identity is obscured. Disabling one camera does not disable all cameras in the area. Nancy's doorbell camera was covered, but the neighbor's camera 2.5 miles away kept recording. Cameras throughout the Catalina foothills kept recording. Walmart parking lot cameras kept recording when the backpack was purchased. Every camera creates independent evidence that can potentially be linked together. Using cash to purchase equipment avoids creating financial records with names attached. But cash transactions still occur at specific times at specific locations with security cameras recording. The payment method changes, but the visual record remains. License plates in parking lots trace to registered owners regardless of how the purchase inside the store was paid for. Every choice creates evidence. Every attempt to avoid one form of evidence creates or leaves intact other forms. And investigators who understand convergence gather evidence from every available source, knowing that the combination will be more powerful than any individual piece. That is the reality of modern forensic investigation. That is why cases that would have been unsolvable 30 years ago get solved today. Technology has advanced. Databases have expanded. Genetic genealogy has emerged. Digital forensics has matured. And the methodology of convergence has been refined and proven through successful prosecutions. The man behind the mask in Nancy Guthrie's case left DNA and digital trails and camera evidence and retail records, and potentially cell tower data and witness observations. Each exists independently. Each is being pursued through appropriate methods by specialists in those fields. And when enough of those independent lines point to the same person, that person will be identified with certainty. The mask protected identity in the moment captured by the doorbell camera, but it cannot protect from the systematic gathering and combination of evidence from dozens of sources over weeks and months of investigation. Justice for Nancy Guthrie will likely come through convergence. Through DNA genealogy identifying candidates and digital forensics identifying searchers and camera analysis, identifying vehicles and retail tracking, identifying purchasers and cell data, identifying locations and the combination of all those threads into one undeniable pattern. That work is happening now. The threads are being gathered. The pattern is emerging or will emerge. And when it does, the man behind the mask will have a name and a history and will face justice. True Crime Vault is committed to providing accurate, comprehensive analysis of this case until resolution. We will continue explaining real investigative techniques, breaking down actual evidence, and following the work of the dedicated professionals who are pursuing justice for Nancy. Subscribe so you never miss coverage. Turn notifications on, like this video, visit our channel, comment with your thoughts, and if you have information that could help this investigation, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 523-51-4900. $1.2 million in total rewards are available for information leading to Nancy's location or to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. But beyond the money, Nancy's family deserves to know what happened to their mother. They deserve to know where she is. They deserve justice. And the evidence exists to provide those answers through the patient systematic work of convergence.